signs above restrooms, water fountains, and on public accommodations, keeping people out based on a distinction without a difference.
That is U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announcing yesterday that the federal government is now going to sue North Carolina after North Carolina announced they're suing the federal government. To explain all this is Lana Zak, ABC News correspondent in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Lana.
Good morning, McGraw. Yes, the only thing that those two sides can probably agree on is that this is something that actually needs to be decided in the court. Otherwise, the question fundamentally comes down to this. Is the North Carolina bathroom bill tantamount to state-sponsored discrimination, or is the federal government trying to mandate in an overreach the protected classes under the Civil Rights Act? So that's something that ultimately will now be decided by the federal courts. Both sides are suing the other, and we'll wait to see how this bathroom bill ends up being resolved, because it's going to have an impact on every other state in the nation.
How much of the backstory, meaning how much was the federal government going to withhold federal funds, a reason why North Carolina sued?
Well, there's up to $4.5 billion in federal funds that could have been on the table for the federal government to pull back under the requirements of Title IX. Whether or not they were going to do all of it or part of it, we'll never know now, because that countdown clock, which was ticking towards the end of business yesterday, has now been paused as these lawsuits have intervened and now take precedence.
So you mentioned the phrase protected class, and we know that there are protected classes in this country. I've never seen one that says transgender is, quote-unquote, a protected class.
Right. So that is part of what the governor was arguing, that transgender and gay populations are not specifically protected, and so they have no claims to discrimination. That's also part of what the bill was codifying. HB 2, in addition to this bathroom aspect, which everybody enjoys talking about so much, it also said that no part of North Carolina's municipalities or cities could enact legislation that would seek to protect gay or transgender rights, and that gay and transgender populations would not be allowed to sue in any North Carolina court for discrimination. So that becomes then the question. The federal government, of course, says that this actually is covered, transgender rights are covered under sex discrimination, because somebody who is transgender has defined their sex, and the rest, and for any government, any state government, or otherwise, to make legislation that specifically target those populations, they say is discrimination.
We should also say that this all got started because wasn't there a city or a town in North Carolina that tried to protect transgenders' rights, and the state came in and said, not so fast?
That's exactly right. So you know your history on this. Because there were a couple of the bigger cities in North Carolina that were either had passed this legislation or were planning on passing this legislation, that's when the state sort of swooped in and nullified all of that, both in the past and in the future. And now the federal government came in and tried to nullify what the state did. So in an interesting question about federalism, it also goes to an interesting question about cities and municipalities and what rights they have in terms of whether or not the state can dictate things to them and whether or not the federal government can dictate things to the state.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Lana Zak, ABC News correspondent in Washington, D.C., following that story in North Carolina. Thanks, Lana. Have a good week.
You too.
8:56.